Sergeant Kate O'Hara had spent 12 years in the Navy, but only the last 3 inside the most demanding community the service had to offer. She was a naval special warfare operator, a pathway open to women only a few years earlier, and she had clawed her way through every obstacle, every doubt, and every sideways glance to earn her trident. The trident pin on her chest was not a gift. It was a statement written in blood, sweat, and sleepless nights on freezing beaches. Yet, on a humid Tuesday morning in Virginia Beach, inside a windowless concrete briefing room at the Joint Expeditionary Base Little Creek Fort Story, none of that seemed to matter. The room smelled of stale coffee, floor wax, and the particular tension that only comes from men who have been to war many times and are about to go again. At the head of the table, Commander Lucas Vance, a man with a shaved head, a jaw like a cinder block, and 2 decades of combat deployments behind him, stood reviewing a satellite image projected on a large screen. Around him sat 8 of his most experienced SEALs, all men, all with faces carved by years of hard missions. Kate stood near the back, her arms crossed over her tactical vest, waiting for her moment. The mission was simple in concept, brutal in execution. A high-value target, a man known only as the Sandman, had been tracked to a compound in a remote valley in northeastern Afghanistan. The intelligence was 48 hours old but solid. The compound sat between 2 steep ridgelines, with only one narrow wadi providing ground approach. 2 buildings, a central courtyard, and a network of spider holes in the surrounding hills. The target was believed to have at least 20 armed guards, possibly more. The plan was a night infiltration to sniper overwatch positions on the eastern ridge, and a direct assault element moving up the wadi. Kate's role was designated as the primary sniper for Overwatch Position 1. She had earned that assignment. In the past 18 months, she had logged more confirmed long-distance shots in training than any other sniper in her battalion. She had graduated at the top of her class from the Special Operations Target Interdiction course, breaking a 30-year-old record for the longest confirmed kill in a nighttime exercise. The men around her knew this. Commander Vance knew this. Still, when Kate stepped forward to confirm her firing positions on the digital map, the room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with tactics. Vance looked at her for a long moment, the way a foreman looks at a tool he does not trust. He then turned to Chief Petty Officer Mike Rex Thompson, a massive man with a neck like a tree trunk, who was already marked as the secondary sniper. "Rex, you take the primary shot," Vance said, his voice flat and final. "Sergeant O'Hara, you'll remain at the fob on communications standby." The words landed like a physical blow. Kate felt her face flush, but she had been trained to control everything, including her own blood pressure. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply asked, "Permission to speak, Commander." Vance did not look up from the map. "Go ahead, sir. My qualifications and recent performance evaluations." "Stand down, Sergeant," Vance interrupted, finally lifting his eyes to meet hers. His expression was not angry. It was worse. It was dismissive, as if she were a child asking for a turn at a grown-up's table. "This is not a debate. Rex has done this before. Real combat, not a sim. You'll get your chance another time." The men around the table shifted uncomfortably. Rex, to his credit, looked down at his boots. He knew Kate was better. Everyone in the room knew. But the commander had spoken, and in the teams, the commander's word was not just law, it was gravity. Kate nodded once, stepped back to the wall, and said nothing else. She watched the rest of the briefing unfold, memorizing every detail of the terrain, every estimated position of every guard, every wind pattern and elevation drop, even though she had been told she would not be going. That was her way. Preparation was not about permission. Preparation was about survival. For days later, the mission went sideways. Before the first boot touched dirt, the Chinook helicopter carrying the assault element encountered unexpected ground fire during insertion, forcing an early extraction of the main force. The 2 sniper teams, including Rex's Overwatch position, managed to deploy but were now dangerously exposed. The Sandman had somehow been alerted, and his guards were sweeping the ridgelines with PKM machine guns and RPGs. Communications were spotty due to the mountainous terrain. But the reports trickling back to the forward operating base told a grim story. Overwatch position 2 had been compromised. 2 SEALs were down, 1 confirmed dead. Rex's team was pinned behind a rock outcropping, unable to move or to acquire a clean shot at the target. The assault element was 30 minutes out, Regrouping at a secondary landing zone, Kate was in the Tactical Operations Center when the news came. She listened to the radio chatter, her eyes scanning the live feed from a drone that circled high above the valley. She saw Rex's position, marked by a blinking blue icon on the map. She saw the heat signatures of at least 15 armed men moving toward him from 3 directions. She saw the courtyard where the Sandman had just emerged from a building, his bodyguards forming a protective ring around him. And she saw, in perfect clarity, the fatal geometry of the situation. Rex's firing position had a limited arc. He could cover the eastern approach and part of the courtyard, but not the spider holes on the northern slope. More importantly, the wind had shifted. The drone's environmental sensors showed a sudden crosswind of 18 miles per hour from the northwest, which would push any shot from Rex's position nearly a foot to the right at 800 meters. Rex was a fine sniper, but he had never been comfortable with extreme wind compensation. Kate had studied his training records. She knew his weaknesses, just as she knew her own. She walked to the mission commander, a captain who had remained at the FOB, and said, "I need to go up there. Now." The captain shook his head. "No time to insert you. The only helo is down for maintenance, and the ground route takes 3 hours. Kate pointed to the screen. "There's a rocky spur on the eastern ridge, 800 meters from the target. I can reach it on foot from the FOB in 45 minutes if I move fast and light. It's a steep climb, but I've scouted that terrain in satellite recon. It's doable." The captain hesitated. He had seen Kate's scores. He had also seen the look on Vance's face during the briefing. But men were dying. "Go," he said. Kate did not run. She moved with the economy of a Wolf, her rifle slung across her back, her rucksack stripped to the absolute minimum. She carried her custom-designed MK13 Mod 7 sniper rifle, a Leupold Mark V HD scope, and exactly 30 rounds of .300 Winchester Magnum ammunition. No food, no water beyond a single canteen, no body armor except her plate carrier. Speed was her only shield. The climb was brutal. The ridge line was a jagged spine of shale and loose rock, each step a negotiation between momentum and gravity. The sun had set an hour earlier, but the moon was nearly full, casting the landscape in silver and shadow. Kate used the shadows like a second skin, moving from boulder to boulder, her breathing controlled and silent. 42 minutes after leaving the FOB, she reached the spur. The position was almost exactly as she had visualized. A flat shelf of rock, just wide enough to lie prone, with natural camouflage from a cluster of thorny bushes. The elevation gave her a clear line of sight across the valley to the compound. The drone feed, relayed to a small handheld device, showed Rex's position still under pressure. One of his men had been hit in the arm. They were running low on ammunition. And the Sandman, emboldened by the chaos, had moved to the roof of the main building, where he stood shouting orders, his outline crisp against the moonlit sky. Kate calculated the distance. 817 meters. The wind was now gusting to 22 miles per hour, with a variable direction that shifted between northwest and north-northwest. Temperature was 44 degrees Fahrenheit, which would affect the bullet's velocity. Humidity was low, which was an advantage. She ran the numbers in her head: the Coriolis effect, the spin drift, the precise minute of angle adjustment needed for the scope. She had done this calculation 1,000 times in training, but never with lives hanging in the balance. She chambered around, settled into her shooting position, and put her eye to the scope. The crosshairs settled on the Sandman's chest. Then she lowered the rifle and looked back at the drone feed. Rex's team was about to be overrun. 3 guards had broken through a gap in the rocks and were advancing within 50 meters of their position. Rex could not see them because his scope was aimed at the compound. Kate could not help them from her position. The spur blocked any line of sight to that part of the ridge. But she could change the entire dynamic of the fight in one shot. She raised the rifle again. The Sandman was still on the roof, gesturing wildly, clearly confident that the American snipers were neutralized. He did not know about Kate. No one did. Not the enemy, not her own side, not even Rex. She was a ghost on an empty ridge. Her breathing slowed. Her heart rate dropped to 45 beats per minute. She had trained to achieve this state, a kind of controlled stillness where the body disappears and only the target remains. The crosshairs drifted across the Sandman's collarbone, then settled on the exact point where the neck meets the shoulder, a guaranteed stop shot. Even if he was wearing body armor, she did not fire. Instead, she shifted her aim to the left. to a cluster of 3 guards standing next to a supply truck near the compound gate. They were the closest reinforcements to the fighters attacking Rex. If she took out the Sandman, the guards might panic or they might redouble their assault. She could not predict. But if she took out the truck specifically, the fuel canisters stacked beside it, the explosion would create chaos, draw attention, and by Rex's precious seconds, it was an unconventional choice. A sniper's job was to eliminate high-value targets, not to blow up trucks. But Kate had learned that war does not follow training manuals. War follows physics. She adjusted her aim, accounted for the wind, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, a sound that seemed to splinter the night itself. The bullet traveled for just over a second, crossing the valley in a flat trajectory that Kate had plotted in her mind before she ever left the FOB. It struck the largest fuel canister dead center, punching through the metal and igniting the vapor inside. The explosion was immediate and spectacular, a fireball that rose 50 feet into the air, followed by a secondary blast as the truck's own fuel tank detonated. The shockwave rolled across the valley, rattling rocks and sending birds into panicked flight. Inside the compound, chaos erupted. Guards ran in every direction, shouting and firing blindly. The Sandman dove off the roof, disappearing into the smoke. But more importantly, the 3 guards advancing on Rex's position turned and sprinted back toward the burning truck, their attack forgotten. Rex and his team used the distraction to shift positions, finally gaining the upper hand. But Kate was not done. Through the smoke and fire, she saw the Sandman emerge from the courtyard, running toward a motorcycle parked behind the main building. He was going to flee. If he escaped, the entire mission would be a failure. The men who had already died would have died for nothing. Kate chambered another round. The smoke was thick, reducing visibility. The fire created thermal currents that distorted the air, making the target shimmer and dance. Her scope showed the Sandman's outline, wavering like a reflection in water. He was already on the motorcycle, the engine sputtering to life. She had one chance. She exhaled, held, and fired. The bullet cut through the smoke, corrected for the thermal distortion by a margin that even Kate could not fully explain. Part calculation, part instinct, part something older than both. It struck the Sandman in the upper spine, just below the base of his skull. He collapsed instantly, the motorcycle falling on top of him. He did not move again. The radio in Kate's ear crackled. It was Rex. Who the hell took that shot? That was not us. Kate did not answer. She was already packing her rifle, melting back into the shadows of the ridge. The mission was not over. There would be time for explanations later. Right now, she needed to get off that mountain before the remaining guards figured out where the shot had come from. She moved downhill with the same silent economy, leaving behind nothing but spent brass and a story that no one was ready to believe. Asterisk. The aftermath of the mission unfolded in the way that military justice and institutional pride often intersect messily, slowly, and with far too many people trying to control a narrative that had already escaped into the wild. When the Chinook finally extracted the surviving members of the assault force at dawn, the body count was confirmed: 1 SEAL dead, 2 wounded, and 18 enemy fighters neutralized, including the high-value target, the Sandman. The intelligence community would later credit the mission with disrupting a major terrorist network that had been planning attacks on 3 European capitals. But in the immediate hours after the firefight, no one was thinking about strategic victories. They were thinking about the impossible shot. Commander Lucas Vance stood in the debriefing tent at Bagram Airfield, staring at a crude map that someone had drawn on a whiteboard. The sniper team from Overwatch Position 1, led by Rex, had reported taking 5 shots during the engagement, all of which were accounted for. Overwatch Position 2 had been out of commission after the first 10 minutes. Yet the drone footage clearly showed 2 shots originating from a location on the eastern ridge that was not assigned to any friendly unit. The first shot had ignited the fuel truck. The second shot, fired 47 seconds later, had killed the Sandman from a distance of 817 meters. Through smoke, fire, and thermal distortion, Vance rubbed his temples. Who was on that ridge? No one answered. Then a young intelligence analyst, a lieutenant with less than 2 years of service, raised her hand. Sir, the thermal signature from the drone shows a single individual moving up that spur approximately 45 minutes before the first shot. The individual then moved down the ridge and returned to the FOB about an hour after the engagement ended. I cross-referenced the heat signature with our personnel roster. Vance waited. It matches Sergeant Kate O'Hara, the analyst said. She left the FOB without authorization and engaged the enemy without a confirmed order to fire. The tent went silent. Vance's face, already hard, seemed to calcify into something older and angrier. He turned to the captain who had given Kate permission to go. The captain met his gaze evenly. She came to me with a plan, Commander. Men were dying. I made a command decision. You made a command decision to send an untested operator into a live combat zone without proper support. Vance's voice was low, but the volume did not matter. The words cut like a scalpel. She was the best option we had, the captain replied. And she got the job done. Vance walked out of the tent without another word. He found Kate sitting on a wooden crate outside the mess hall, her rifle disassembled across her knees, meticulously cleaning each component. She was still in her combat uniform, still smeared with the dust and sweat of the ridge. She looked up when she saw him approaching and set down her cleaning rod. Sergeant O'Hara. Vance said, Commander, you left your assigned position without authorization. I was not assigned a position, sir. I was assigned to communications standby. Vance's jaw tightened. You know what I mean. Kate stood up, holding her rifle in one hand. With respect, Commander, I had two options. I could follow the rules and listen over the radio while Rex and his team got killed. Or I could climb a hill and do my job. I chose my job. You could have compromised the entire mission. You could have been captured. You could have I could have missed. Kate interrupted, her voice calm. But I didn't. The target is dead. 3 of our people are alive because of that shot. I understand the regulations, sir. I understand the chain of command. But I also understand that a dead SEAL cannot follow orders and a living one can face a court-martial. I made my peace with that before I left the FOB. Vance stared at her for a long time. He was a man who had built his entire identity around discipline, around the idea that the rules existed to keep everyone alive. But he was also a man who had buried friends. He knew, in the part of himself that he rarely acknowledged, that Kate was right. Her unauthorized action had saved lives. But acknowledging that would mean admitting that his own judgment had been flawed. That his dismissal of her in that briefing room had been based on something other than merit. We'll have an Article 32 hearing, Vance said finally. Your actions will be reviewed. I recommend you get a lawyer. He turned and walked away. Kate watched him go, then sat back down on the crate and resumed cleaning her rifle. The Article 32 hearing was held 10 days later, in the same windowless briefing room where Vance had first told Kate to stand down. The room was now packed with lawyers, officers, and a small contingent of journalists who had somehow gotten wind of the story. The military had tried to keep the incident quiet, but the drone footage had been leaked to a defense blog, and the phrase SEAL sniper single shot had already become a trending search term. No one yet knew that the sniper was a woman. That detail was still classified, held tightly by a public affairs office that did not know what to do with it. The presiding officer was a grizzled Marine colonel named Hayes, a man who had seen 3 wars and had no patience for political games. He listened to the prosecution's case: unauthorized departure from assigned duties, failure to follow the chain of command, reckless endangerment of mission integrity. The prosecutor, a sharp-faced Navy lieutenant commander, argued that Kate's actions, while successful, had set a dangerous precedent. If every operator decides on their own when to engage the enemy, he said, we have an army of individuals, not a team. Then it was Kate's turn. She had not hired a lawyer. She stood before the colonel in her dress uniform, her trident gleaming on her chest, and spoke without notes. Colonel Hayes, I am not here to argue that I followed every regulation. I did not. I left my assigned post. I engaged the enemy without direct orders, and I put myself in a position where, had I been captured, I could have compromised sensitive intelligence. Those are facts. I will not deny them.